Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. 1 week to go, shares down in Japan as President Trump ramps up criticism of Tokyo and says his July 9th global tariff deadline will not be extended. Powell's pushback. The Fed chair says rates are on hold because of US tariffs, but he doesn't rule out a cut in July. Plus, Starmer weakened. The UK Prime Minister's welfare legislation passes Parliament, but only after its main provisions were dropped, leaving a potential £5 billion hole in the government's finances. Good morning, happy Wednesday. So the tariff rhetoric is back, the uncertainty is back, and President Trump trying to push what he may see as his advantage in terms of those negotiations with Japan as we count down, of course, to next week's July the 9th deadline. He says he will not be moving that. The jobs data, of course, is up front, and that will drop on Thursday. That could be the next catalyst for these markets as they weigh up the comments then from Jay Powell, not closing the door on a potential cut for July. That is not being priced by the markets. 20% odds so far, but Jay Powell not shutting that down completely in his conversations with Francine Lacqua yesterday. European futures pointing higher by 0.6% after 3 straight days of losses for European stocks. Not dramatic, but the losses have been there for 3 straight days. Today, futures slightly brighter when it comes to the European story. FTSE 100 futures here in the UK looking to add 0.3%. We have a weakened Prime Minister now in the UK. S&P futures stateside looking to gain 0.2% after modest losses yesterday, and you saw a rotation out of the Nasdaq 100, which closed lower by around 0.8%, but you saw gains in the Russell 2000, those small cap, mid cap stocks stateside. So a rotation out of big into smaller cap stocks stateside was pronounced yesterday. Nasdaq, though, today 100 called higher by 0.3%. Let's flip the board and have a look cross asset then. Across the Treasury markets, relative stability today, 425 right now as we count down, of course, to the non-farm payrolls data on Thursday. Euro-dollar at 117, still at those near those 118 levels on euro strength. Today, just a little softer by 0.1%. Brent at $67 a barrel, and gold just marginally higher, just by 1 point at 3,340. Let's cross over to Asia right now. Avril Hong standing by in Singapore with a focus, no doubt, on Japan. Avril.
Absolutely, especially after Trump expressed his frustration over stalled trade talks, singling Japan out over rice, over autos. That is where the gulf still remains between U.S. and Japanese trade negotiators. But the backdrop is that Asia stocks are mostly in retreat, given the revival of these tariff threats. And a cautious Powell is really unhelpful for equities in the region. We are seeing the Nikkei down for a second day, though it is pairing the declines of more than 1% from earlier on in the session. The Hang Seng is a bit of an outlier today because of Macau casino stocks. That's a bit of an outlier. Worth noting as well that when it comes to the trade deal optimism, even if we see one, most think that the baseline 10% tariff rate is here to stay. That would mean continued headwinds for export-reliant economies in the region, and that's not helpful, again, for Asia stocks. Let's flip the board and take a look at Asia currencies. They're mostly on the back foot today. The yen, the renminbi, the Hong Kong dollar. Indeed, the Hong Kong dollar is believed to have touched the weak end of the permitted trading range, and the Hong Kong Monetary Authority actually stepped in to intervene, buying up more local currency than last week in order to defend the currency peg. Now flip the board, because this adds to the sense of the Hong Kong dollar being on a pretty wild ride in the past couple of months. You may recall back in May when the dollar slumped, the Hong Kong dollar experienced this rush in from investors, and that led to the appreciation in the local currency. The HKMA's response was to pump liquidity into the system, and that led to a lowering in borrowing costs and a widening in the gap with the US. That also meant this popularity to fund carry trades and the weakness in turn of the Hong Kong dollar. So it's really interesting to see how the greenbacks move have influence some of the central banks in the region, and no doubt also intensify the debate about the sustainability of the Hong Kong dollar's peg against the US dollar. Tom.
OK, the wild ride of the Hong Kong dollar back in focus around the peg as well. Avril Hong in Singapore with a check on the Asian markets. Thank you, Avril. Now, President Trump says he's sticking with his July the 9th trade deal deadline, while renewing his threat then to cut off talks and slap duties on various nations, including Japan.
writing letters to a lot of countries, and I think you're just starting to understand the process. We've dealt with Japan. I'm not sure if we're going to make a deal. I doubt it with Japan. They're very tough, and therefore you'll pay a 30%, 35%, or whatever the number is that we determine, because we also have a very big trade deficit with Japan, as you know.
OK, joining me now is Bloomberg's senior editor, Bill Ferries. And, Bill, the pushback against Japan seems to have grown from President Trump in the last few days, or at least it's become underscored. What do we know in terms of Japan's response? Is this a Trump positioning ahead of a potential deal, or is there real concern right now that relations in terms of these trade talks could break down?
Yeah, it's really hard to know. I mean, we're a week out from that July 9th deadline. Is this just a Trump strategy to really tighten the screws on Japan to get some last-minute concessions in these final days? Or is he just so frustrated with the pace of negotiation that he wants to, as he said, just send a letter saying 30%, 35%, you're welcome? We just don't know yet. Trump's strategy, though, is to tend to tighten the screws in the final days. I don't think he's going to talk about extending the July 9th deadline for anyone until we're in that really, like, maybe perhaps final 24 hours. Japan has taken a pretty soft approach in terms of being optimistic cautiously about where these talks can go. You're right. A month ago, 2 months ago, when this process started, the administration was saying Japan was at the top of the list as one of the countries most likely to make a deal. Now that that deadline's looming, they seem to be changing their tone. It's hard to know whether that's really reflective of how they see the talks going, or if they just want a couple more gives from Japan on things like rice and autos.
And meanwhile, on the domestic agenda of President Trump, Bill, a win for the president in terms of the Senate backing this big, beautiful bill, with the help, of course, of J.D. Vance and that final vote, that tiebreaker vote. Now it heads to the House. Is it likely to get through? Is July the 4th still a prospect in terms of getting this bill on the president's desk?
It's going to be super tight. The landing, I think the glide path to getting this deal on his desk is going to be very rocky. July 4th, very much in doubt at this point. The Senate did make several changes, significant changes to the House legislation. There are already members, Republican members of the House lining up to say they don't like this deal. It costs too much. It made changes that they don't find acceptable. Just like on the Senate side, the Republicans can only afford to lose 3 votes on the House. There are already 2 Republican members who have been very much out there saying that they are no's on this. So that really leaves a margin of 1. There's no tiebreaker vote with J.D. Vance on the House side. So it's going to be on pins and needles, I think, as the House takes this up Wednesday morning. That Friday deadline President Trump set may have to slip into the weekend. They may have to reconfigure. We're going to know a lot more in the next 12 to 24 hours.
OK, Bloomberg's senior editor, Bill Ferries, with 2 important deadlines there on trade and on that bill, July the 4th and July the 9th. Bill, thank you. Now to central bank policy, and Federal Reserve Chair, of course, Jerome Powell says he is sticking to his wait-and-see mode when it comes to rate cuts, saying that is largely down to President Donald Trump's expanded use of tariffs. This is what he told Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua at a panel of the world's top central bankers in Sintra, Portugal.
In effect, we went on hold when we saw the size of the tariffs, and essentially all inflation forecasts for the United States went up materially as a consequence of the tariffs. So we didn't overreact. In fact, we didn't react at all. We're simply taking some time. As long as the U.S. economy is in solid shape, we think the prudent thing to do is to wait and learn more and see what those effects might be. And again, they haven't really shown up. So for now, we're waiting.
Well, Francine joins us now then, and some really fascinating comments from Jerome Powell. And Fran, you also asked him, of course, about the prospects of a July rate cut. Did he leave the door open to that as something that he and the FOMC may consider?
Well, he certainly didn't rule it out, Tom. And I was interested being on such a high-powered panel with 5 of the most important central bankers in the world. And they really had something in common, which was patience, patience, patience. Now, this is because they're waiting for the effects of the tariffs really to roll out to better understand, which is why the Fed chair, Jay Powell, also pushed back against the idea that, you know, every meeting is not live. So he says, look, it's really meeting by meeting. Let's see what happens. They're very, very alert on shocks. It was interesting to me when you heard from Jay Powell that he's really waiting to see, as everyone else, he's waiting to see the effects of the tariffs, which are expecting to show up in inflation data in the U.S. in the coming months, and will make decisions, you know, on a meeting by meeting basis. But what struck me is his tone when he talked about being ready to adjust to the downside or to the upside, depending on how these tariffs actually push through to inflation. So given all the uncertainties, we also heard from the ECB President Christine Lagarde about looking at scenarios, because that would give you a better picture, a more complete picture of what they're facing. And so 5 very different central banks, 5 very different economies, but all were focused on patience to try and figure out how this plays out, all this uncertainty plays out in the coming months.
Yeah, and the UK, certainly the Bank of England, has been patient, hasn't it? And you spoke to Bailey on that panel, the BOE Governor Andrew Bailey, saying that high interest rates in the UK are having less of an impact. What exactly did he mean by that in terms of the transmission mechanisms of rates here in the UK?
Yeah, so for me that was really interesting because you have the Fed on one side, and of course there's pressure from President Trump almost on a daily basis on Jay Powell to cut rates. We heard from the ECB president almost taking a victory lap, claiming a small victory with euro area inflation recently printed exactly at 2%. And then you have Andrew Bailey from the Bank of England somewhere in the middle. Now, he did acknowledge that there was recent softness in UK wages and activity, but refused to pre-commit also to a cut in August. Now, what was interesting is that he says, look, basically there's reduced rate sensitivity, and this is because of the way that savers behaved post-COVID, and that implies maybe a shallower easing cycle, going forward. So this is what he said about the basically, the importance between saving and what it means for the rate cycle going forward.
The level of household and corporate debt in the UK economy is actually lower than we would have expected it to be, but based on past experience. So again, that feeds through into just how restrictive policy is at a given interest rate. It's somewhat less restrictive probably than it would have been historically.
So, Tom, because of the transmission mechanism, but just because of legacy, because, again, we've come through like 3-4 years of complete change in the way that savers behave and the way that consumers behave. He said he wouldn't commit. I asked him whether he saw us more at 3% or 4% at the end of the easing cycle. He didn't commit to that, but he'd say could be shallower maybe than he thought a couple of months ago.
Yeah, 4.25 right now in terms of the Bank of England rate. With market expectations, you could see that down to 3.66 by the end of the year. Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua at the ECB Forum, of course, in Sintra. Francine, thank you. I'm going to have live coverage of the ECB Forum continuing in Sintra all day, including interviews with the BNP Paribas chief economist and central bankers from Portugal, Finland and the UK. Stay with us for that. Now, the US stock rally stalled late yesterday after President Donald Trump said he is not considering a delay to his July the 9th deadline for higher tariffs. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel for the market reaction. Val.
There was some interesting things going on the hood. Yes, we had the S&P 500 backing off of those record highs, but there was also a decent rotation happening out of tech into small caps yesterday. We actually saw the biggest outperformance of Russell 2000 versus the NASDAQ 100 since April. So this is not something that we see often. Tom, questions about what really drove this. There was a thought that maybe that Senate tax bill getting passed really helping domestic growth out, leading those domestic exposed small cap stocks higher. There was also a pause to the momentum trade, and we did have Tesla down 5%. So that also hindered tech stocks. But this rotation into small caps yesterday was quite notable. The other thing that hindered the equity rally yesterday was a sustained rise in 2-year yields. After hitting the lowest that they've been in 2 months, we had an abrupt rise in the front end yields after better than expected U.S. job openings data, also better than expected ISM manufacturing data, really drove the front end yields higher yesterday. up around 6 basis points now in the last 2 sessions. Now, disappointingly, normally the dollar is helped out by a rise in short-term interest rate differentials. That did not happen yesterday. We saw a continued gain for the euro dollar, up now for 9 straight sessions, Tom, its longest winning streak in 20 years, as this dollar weakness really shows no sign of stopping.
OK, the euro story continues in terms of that strength coming through for the single currency. Bloomberg's Valerie Titel, thank you very much indeed. Here's what else to think about today then. 10 a.m. UK time, euro area unemployment data will drop. We'll break that for you at 1:30 p.m. UK time. Additional details in terms of the labour market of the US. Val was just touching on this. We get US ADP employment, and then, of course, non-farm payrolls is tomorrow. And at 2 p.m. UK time, Tesla's second quarter sales, as Elon Musk takes over the coverage in terms of the focus on sales out of Europe, which has been the challenge, and the US, of course, as well. You can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to DAYB Go. And front and centre, of course, is Trump taking a swipe at Japan. Coming up, Santander agrees to buy UK bank TSB from Sabadell in a deal worth £2.7 billion. Deal making in the bank space. The details are next. Plus, later in the programme, I will be speaking to the inventor of a potentially groundbreaking polymer that could change the way surgeons repair damaged nerves. Stay with us for that. This is Bloomberg.
It's Jobs Day, and Bloomberg has the report under surveillance.
There is this feeling that the labor market is contracting.
There's some risk that layoffs are growing.
Medium-term outlook is the economy should be fine.
This Thursday, Jonathan, Lisa, Anne-Marie, and Mike will bring you crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed.
The weakening trend continues.
This is a trend. We're seeing declines.
If you're not with a job right now, it's harder to find a new one.
The June Jobs Report, Thursday on Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, Banco Santander has agreed to buy UK lender TSB from its Spanish rival Banco Sabadell. The deal, worth £2.65 billion, will make Santander the UK's third largest lender by some measures. For more on this and some other banking stories this morning, Bloomberg's Manuel Baigorri joins us from Hong Kong. Manuel, start us then with the story around Santander TSB. Tell us more about the deal and how significant this could be in terms of reshaping the UK's banking landscape.
Yes, Tom, a significant deal in banking in the UK. Just another one in the finance space across Europe this year, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of consolidation or potential consolidation moves in banking in different countries, and this is the last one. A very important one for Santander because it emphasizes the importance of their growth strategy and also how they want to grow in the UK. There have been a lot of questions over the years on how significant, how important this market could be for Santander. And here is a very important statement from the bank saying that they are in the UK to stay and to actually grow exponentially thanks to this acquisition. Interestingly, also, the seller, Banco Sabadell from Spain, is also in the middle of a takeover bid from bigger rival BBVA. So it will be interesting to see the impact of this transaction on the BBVA potential acquisition of Sabadell and what the next moves could potentially be on that transaction. But definitely a clear statement from Santander and the growth plans for the bank in the UK.
Yeah, so the statement is there, and as you say, a reminder that there is banking consolidation happening. At least we'll see what happens with, as you say, Sabadell and BBVA as well. In the UK and Europe, in terms of that consolidation, it is happening, even at a slow pace. Let's turn to the US now then, Manuel, and there's another reason, potentially, to be happy if you've got shares in some of the big Wall Street lenders, and this is on the back of the stress tests.
Yes, Thomas, you rightly said, with the banks, the major banks passing the stress test this year from the Fed. All of them are now increasing payouts, dividend increasingly, increasing significantly as well for this year. That should make investors happy for sure, and it clearly shows that the banks have those buffers required by the Fed in case there is any potential crisis down the line. So a very important milestone also for the biggest banks in the US as well.
And before we let you go, Manuel, from banks to pharma, and AstraZeneca reports maybe that the listing could be moving out of the UK.
Yeah, very interesting to see the report by the Times about AstraZeneca. I mean, obviously, a lot of the companies in the UK have been looking for ways to, maximize their value and moving their primary listing to the US, particularly in sectors like pharmaceuticals, could make some sense. We need to bear in mind that the US is traditionally a much more mature market for sectors including pharmaceuticals or biotech. And obviously, companies in Europe or in the UK, like AstraZeneca, may continuously explore options to offer better value for their shareholders. Their report by the Times was also mentioning some frustration about regulatory approvals for drugs and development in the country, and whether that could also be one of the triggers for such potential move remains to be seen. And obviously, from a company exploring options to actually executing that potential move, there is a lot of work to be done and a lot of work behind the scenes. But definitely, if it were to happen, it would potentially be a significant blow for the UK as a capital center, given that it's such an iconic company, obviously.
Yeah, another major wake-up call in terms of those overseeing the capital markets of the UK. Manuel Baigorri, thank you very much indeed. On the banks and the pharma space, meanwhile, the CFO of Santander will be on the opening trade. Don't miss that interview. That's at 7:30 a.m. London time. Coming up, the French president says he and Vladimir Putin have agreed to work together on Iran after their first phone call since 2022. The details are coming up. This is Bloomberg.
We are determined to continue to be data dependent, to decide meeting by meeting, and to not commit to any particular rate path.
We are going meeting by meeting. I mentioned, how I'm thinking about that, but I wouldn't take any meeting off the table or put it directly on the table. It's going to depend on how the data evolve. But as I mentioned, a majority of us do feel that it will be appropriate in the remaining 4 meetings of the year to begin to reduce rates again.
It will depend on the relative strength of the 3 inflation dynamics, and we need some more information to determine that.
We are going to have to see those come through, though. I mean, come through into prices. I think we've still got to see the evidence and prices. But that background context allows certainly me to say, look, I think the direction of interest rates continues to be downwards.
We cut our interest rate 100 BP from last October, and we will continue to be in an easing cycle given our growth rate. But recently, financial stability risk has been rising, so we are keeping an eye on this financial stability risk in deciding the pace and the timing of the further cuts.
OK, central bankers speaking with Francine Lacroix at the ECB Forum in Sintra, of course, about the pace and timing of any potential interest rate cuts. Now, some of the stories making the news this Wednesday. The German medical technology company Brainlab has postponed its IPO in Frankfurt. The company has not given a reason, but the deal had been expected to price at the low end of its range. Last week, the German car parts retailer Autodoc also postponed its Frankfurt offering. Euronext says it's in talks to buy the Athens Stock Exchange in a move it says would help integrate Greek capital markets into the euro area. We'll keep across that story for you. Coming up, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and his woes. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. 1 week to go. Shares down in Japan as President Trump ramps up criticism of Tokyo and says his July the 9th global tariff deadline won't be extended. Powell's pushback. The Fed chair says rates are on hold because of US tariffs, but he doesn't rule out a cut in July. Plus, Starmer weakened. The UK Prime Minister's welfare legislation passes Parliament, but only after its main provisions were dropped, leaving a potential £5 billion hole in the government's finances. Let's check in on the markets right now. European futures pointing higher after 3 straight days of losses, looking to gain 0.4%, close to 0.5%. The next catalyst for these markets could be the non-farm payroll data, the jobs data out of the US that is expected to show a bit of cooling, but not a labour market that is completely derailed. FTSE 100 futures pointing to gains of 0.3%. S&P E-minis after modest losses yesterday, looking to add 0.2%, and Nasdaq 100 futures looking to add 58 points after rotation out of mega tech stocks into the Russell 2000 yesterday, with that index up a little over 1% by the end of the close. Let's flip the board and have a look cross-asset then. Treasury's relatively stable. Jay Powell saying that their plans to cut have been derailed essentially by the tariff regime, not closing the door completely though on July as a month when they could act again. 424 right now on the US benchmark 10-year, 117 close to 118 on euro dollar, the single currency down 0.1%, Brent up by about 0.1 at $67 a barrel, and gold also gaining just by 3 points at $3,341 per troy ounce. To the UK now, where aftermarket Prime Minister Keir Starmer dramatically abandoned his flagship welfare reforms to avoid what would have been his first ever defeat in Parliament, but at what cost to his authority and to the nation's finances. Our UK correspondent Lizzie Burden joins us now for more. Lizzie, how weakened is the UK Prime Minister now?
Well, Tom, Keir Starmer faced an ugly choice, didn't he, before this vote? On the one hand, he could have lost a key vote, as you say, and it's not one that he should have struggled to pass, theoretically, given he's got this huge, historic 165 MP majority. His other choice, though, was to make a U-turn, and it was on this bill, this welfare reform bill, and particularly the contentious part was restricting benefit payments to some disabled people from next year. Some of the Labour MPs were saying that that was Dickensian, so Keir Starmer chose the U-turn. But as you suggest, Tom, the cost is both political and economic, because this last-minute change means that he's given up all the savings the reform would have given him in the first place. And that means it's even more likely that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is going to have to either raise taxes in the autumn or bend her fiscal rules. She said she won't do either, so it means her job's under threat, he's weaker than ever, and now the government's billions of pounds in the red.
Well, as we keep an eye on the bond markets and the gilt markets when they open at 8 a.m. UK time, talk us through what pressure is on now the UK Chancellor. On a number of fronts, Rachel Reeves is feeling the heat.
She is indeed, Tom, because the fiscal watchdog, the Office for Budget Responsibility, yesterday admitted that actually it's been too optimistic, more optimistic than consensus when it comes to the medium-term growth outlook. And that's important, of course, because when it comes to that autumn budget, they're going to have to come out with their updated forecasts for growth and productivity. And if they get downgraded after they investigate all of this over the summer, then it's going to leave Rachel Reeves even less headroom, and she already had a razor-thin margin against her fiscal rules the last time she raised taxes. And so, again, it makes it more likely she's going to have to raise taxes again. That means that there would be less growth. So it leaves the UK economy in this doom loop. It's a really difficult position to be in for the Chancellor, and it leaves a lot of heavy lifting to trade deals, because Starmer's got very few cards to play at this moment in order to build and boost growth. Does he need to cosy up to Brussels? Remember, he was once the arch Remainer, so a big question there.
OK, Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden on a deep challenge then for the UK Prime Minister and his government. Lizzie, thank you. To the French President right now, Emmanuel Macron, and Russian President Vladimir Putin have held their first phone call since 2022, agreeing to coordinate their approach on Iran. The discussion is part of a broader effort among the 5 permanent UN Security Council members to forge a common strategy on Iran. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Oliver Crook, who's been following this for us, joins us around the desk right now. What is behind Macron's move then? Picking up the phone to Vladimir Putin at a time, of course, when France continues to support Ukraine against that Russian aggression.
It's a fairly significant shift. You know, it's the first time they've spoken since 2022. It's not the first time a Western leader actually in recent months has reached out to Vladimir Putin. You'll remember Olaf Scholz, just actually weeks after Trump was elected president of the United States, reached out to Vladimir Putin in this sort of shift of what's happening diplomatically and geopolitically. They spoke on the phone for over 2 hours. Not surprisingly, there wasn't any sort of massive breakthrough, but it's significant that they're talking, particularly at a time when the Europeans and Macron himself are finding difficulty in ways to assert themselves on geopolitical conflicts around the world, on Iran, on Ukraine. We had the readout from the conversation. They talked for, 2 hours plus. They said, according to the Kremlin, they agreed to maintain contact in order to coordinate their stances on Iran if necessary. So, maybe putting a little bit of doubt in that. But they also talked about Ukraine, obviously. The Russian position has not been changed on that. Vladimir Putin is not the sort of person who gives anything away when he doesn't need to, and he certainly doesn't feel that he needs to with Emmanuel Macron. We should say Macron also spoke to Zelensky to try to reassure him. But this is coming also, Tom, overnight, as we just got the news from the Pentagon, that they're going to actually not give all of the munitions that they had been promising from the Biden administration because they say that their own stockpiles are low at a time when Putin has been ramping up the attacks on drones and missiles in the last few weeks in the wake of the attacks over Iran, when the rest of the world has been distracted. So the Ukrainians certainly will be feeling the heat and feeling the pressure with Macron now speaking openly with Vladimir Putin.
And yet those additional sanctions as a package are ready to go, and he could pull the trigger on those in the US, and yet the president seems reluctant to do that. To another part of the Middle East then, so that's the focus on Iran by Macron and the Russians. When it comes to what's happening in Gaza, what is the update there? What have we been hearing from the US side on the brutal situation in Gaza?
Yeah, so we had a Truth Social from the president yesterday, and I'll give you just sort of the summary of what he said. He said that basically Israel has agreed to the conditions for a 60-day ceasefire. He says that now that time would be devoted to ending the war fully within Gaza, that Egypt and Qatar will now deliver this framework to Hamas. Hamas will then answer. He says that he would like Hamas to say yes. If they don't, things will get much, much worse. It's hard to say, Tom, what has really changed from just about a month ago where you had the same situation. The Israelis had signed off on one side of this. Hamas said basically our condition is you need to guarantee the exit of Israeli troops from Gaza, and that was rejected, not even by the Israelis, by Witkoff, so that was just sort of dropped right sort of then and there. The question is what has really changed there from the Hamas perspective, from the conflict's perspective. Obviously, there's been a huge amount of distraction for what is going on in Iran, not so much focus on Gaza, and a huge amount of chaos and violence around this aid distribution that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. A lot of people have been killed, so the pressure potentially mounting there. The next thing we're going to watch for is what Hamas now responds, and of course now we're also expecting Benjamin Netanyahu to head to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Trump on July the 7th, so that's the next sort of thing.
Okay, so we look ahead to that meeting between the Israeli Prime Minister and his US counterpart in Washington. Oliver Crook, thank you very much indeed. See if there's any substance to this ceasefire opportunity that President Trump seems to be pushing for. Meanwhile, the US, as Ollie was saying, has stopped deliveries of artillery rounds and air defences to Ukraine after a review of munitions stockpiles. The White House says it follows concerns that US weapons stocks have fallen too low. The decision comes as Ukraine struggles to repel record missile and drone strikes by Russia, which have intensified in recent weeks. Now, as Elon Musk moves to shore up Tesla, politics is back at the fore, in particular his relationship with President Donald Trump. Trump has suggested that Doge, the cost-cutting effort that Musk himself helped to set up, could be unleashed on the subsidies for the billionaire's businesses.
We might have to put Doge on Elon. You know what Doge is? Doge is the monster that might have to go back and eat Elon. Wouldn't that be terrible? So I think what's going to happen is Doge is going to look at Musk. And if Doge looks at Musk, we're going to save a fortune. Thank you very much, everybody. I don't think you should be playing that game with me.
OK, well, Bloomberg's Danny Lee joins us from Hong Kong. So, Danny, just as it appeared that Musk and Trump had entered something of a détente, there's a new war of words. What is going on?
Yeah, I mean, after Elon Musk amped up his criticism of this big tax and spending bill going through Washington, President Donald Trump has fired back once again, taking aim at the billions of subsidies that Tesla benefits from year after year, and also then going further and just putting more pressure on Musk, questioning whether his immigration status should be reviewed. Of course, Musk, being South African-born, has U.S. citizenship, but the kind of top line from all of this is it just leaves more heat on Tesla politically, particularly at a time it is struggling to revive sales and as it's trying to muddle its way through a whole list of executive departures. So this is not what Elon Musk wants, frankly, and particularly as two of the world's most powerful people lock horns once again.
Yeah, and indeed, look, you touch on the changes, or at least the changes and challenges at Tesla. And one of those changes is Musk then taking control of sales in Europe and the US. What is the significance of this?
Well, I think Elon Musk is really putting his money where his mouth is, right? After stepping back into taking greater reins of Tesla after leaving Doge himself. I think investors wanted to see what more Elon Musk could do to put more of the Musk magic back into Tesla and to revive sales once again. And so by Musk taking control of sales in North America and Europe, two of its most important markets, let's see what he can do, and particularly after yet another key lieutenant, Omid Afshar, left the company. It has left a bit of a shake-up in its ranks, means that another lieutenant, Tom Zhu, who is going to keep overseeing the China sales and Asia sales overall, but also oversee global manufacturing. So these bit of changes hopefully will ensure that there's enough bandwidth for Musk to continue tweeting, but also to make sure he can revive Tesla sales, more importantly.
OK, Danny, and we get more data on the sales picture later today. This is second quarter sales figures. What are you looking for?
Well, we expect sales numbers of 390,000 for the second quarter. That would represent around a kind of 10 to 12% decline year on year. But it depends on where the numbers land either side of that particular expectation from the markets, because as we saw a drop in the shares of around 5.3% on the close on Wall Street yesterday, just how much more whether Tesla sales will beat or miss, this will be really closely watched and could put the shares back under pressure once again.
OK, Bloomberg's Asia Aviation and Transport reporter Danny Lee, thank you very much indeed, with the focus once again on Musk and Tesla and whether those numbers can shore up confidence in the company and the brand. Danny, thank you. Coming up, we will be joined by the inventor of a system that could improve outcomes for people with nerve damage. Some innovation in the pharma space and some backing from the FDA, the regulators stateside. We'll talk about all of that next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Something a little different now, but potentially with very broad consequences for the medical space. The US FDA has given authorization to market a system developed to repair damaged nerves without stitches. The Tissium Connect technology, that's the name of it, holds the damaged nerve together with a biopolymer which can be programmed to match the surrounding tissue. We're joined now by Maria Pereira, who is the co-founder and chief innovation officer of the French medtech company Tissium, which has raised about 200 million euros as well. Maria, good morning. Thank you for joining us. What is a programmable polymer and what is the significance of this technology?
Yeah, good morning. So Tissium is a medical device company developing a new class of materials that can be used for tissue repair. And our goal is to deploy this material across different solutions to repair damaged tissues and restore its form and function. So we are currently developing a pipeline of solutions, and really the goal is to leverage these materials to replace some of the existing technology for tissue repair, such as sutures and staples or tags that are effective fixation technologies, but they still can damage the underlying tissue. There are certain tissues that are very fragile where they cannot be really effective. So we are developing this biopolymer really with the goal of promoting a traumatic and sutureless tissue repair. And Tissium Connect, it's is the first product on our pipeline that we are deploying, starting with US market.
Yeah, and you were the one, you came up with it, with this polymer. What does the FDA authorization, Maria, mean that you can do that you couldn't otherwise do?
Yeah, so the FDA authorization basically allows us to do the commercial launch of this first solution leveraging this polymer technology in the US market. Tissium, as a company, we have global ambitions, but definitely the US remains a key market for us, and we are very excited to be able to bring this technology and this solution to patients, to surgeons as to patients, where it's going to have its impact. We are also developing a pipeline of other products leveraging the same core technology across different fields such as hernia repair, cardiovascular, which are great demonstrations that the potential of the technology, of the same core technology across very different domains, really with the goal of promoting a traumatic and traumatic tissue repair.
Yeah. What is the timeline then for commercialization? How quickly can you commercialize this product? And what is the potential market size of this innovation?
Yeah. So we have been working, in addition of working, of course, on the FDA approval, or on the FDA on having our de novo for this first solution. We have been quite proactive, working on our supply chain, commercial operations, and we have already a strong presence in the US with our clinical, regulatory, and commercial teams. So the launch of the product in the US is going to take place in the coming months, and peripheral nerve repair as a market as a whole is around the $2 billion. It's around the $2 billion market.
Okay, so a $2 billion market, and you mentioned other products in the pipeline. Give us an idea of what you're working on in terms of the pipeline of products beyond this one that's just received this FDA authorization.
Yes, yeah. So in addition to this product, we also have a solution for hernia repair to basically fix meshes in the abdominal cavity without use of any sutures or tacks, and that's currently in clinical stage. So we have an ongoing clinical trial in Europe, and working very closely also with the FDA to bring this technology to the market as effectively as possible. And we have also developed a cardiovascular sealant, where we had some early testing in Europe for an early version of the polymer in Europe, and also working very closely with the regulators in the US to bring this technology to the market. So I'm really excited about our pipeline and how really we can create a new standard for tissue fixation. That's our goal.
Okay, and you and the team have talked about bringing a new product to market every year, which seems ambitious. Look, you've raised what, about 200 million euros, Maria? Are you fundraising again this year? Do you expect to fundraise again this year? What are your IPO plans?
Yeah, we always have a very proactive approach to fundraising. So we continue to work with existing investors and new investors to really continue to fund our operations, our growth plans, and make sure we can fully leverage the potential of the technology across these different spaces. So we are very proactive on the approach and continue to work very closely with investors.
Okay, and an IPO is something that you're considering?
I think time will tell. I think that right now we are a private company, and we'll advance as needed to make sure we can successfully build this new standard for tissue repair.
Okay, Maria Pereira, co-founder and chief innovation officer at Tissium. Maria, thank you. There's a lot more coming up. We're going to break down what to expect from the non-farm payrolls data. Jobs, of course, tomorrow. We're going to give you an outline of, well, as the Tesla deliveries second quarter coming through later today and what to zero in on. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
Clearly, it's an important year. There's a lot going on, with trade, and I'm hopeful that we'll look back on it as a year where we successfully challenged some significant economic changes, and our job is to make sure that is the case.
You get attacked by the president a lot on a personal basis. Does it make your job harder?
I'm very focused on just doing my job. I mean, there are things that, the things that matter are using our tools to achieve the goals that Congress has given us: maximum employment, price stability, financial stability. And that's what we focus on, 100%.
Madame Lagarde, if you were in the same position as Chair Powell, would you do anything differently?
I think I speak for myself, but I speak for all colleagues on the panel. I think we would do exactly the same thing as our colleague Jay Powell does. The same thing. Yeah. Right?
Yes.
OK, central bank governors there showing solidarity and support for Jay Powell at the ECB forum in Sintra, who, of course, has come under attack from President Trump on a fairly regular basis, as Francine Lacroix was pointing out. Now, the next big catalyst for these markets could be the non-farm payrolls data. Of course, this ties into the thinking around the Fed. Markets now pricing at about 60 basis points of cuts, but not completely ruling out, Jay Powell, a potential cut in July. He did say he wants to see data that comes through. He expects the inflation data, the inflation impact to come through on tariffs towards the end of the summer. So it does seem to suggest that July is pretty unlikely. Nonetheless, you're pricing at about 60 basis points. Non-farm payroll data could, of course, change that equation. It drops tomorrow, brought forward a day early, of course, because of the holiday on Friday. Top line, the estimates, the survey is looking at 110,000, a little softer from the previous month at 139,000. Unemployment level expected to tick up, just 4.3% versus 4.2%. We did have, of course, the job openings, the JOLTS data that came through yesterday. A bit of surprise there in terms of the number of openings coming in slightly higher than expected. So watch for the non-farm payrolls within that context, of course, dropping tomorrow. Let's flip the board and have a look at a very different story, which is around Tesla. And we've seen this spat break out into the open once again between Musk, of course, and President Trump. Before we get to that, we get the second quarter sales that drop later today. You're expected to see a slightly modest improvement from the previous quarter, but nonetheless still a slowing down in terms of year on year in terms of those sales numbers and deliveries. 389,000. We've seen the weakness in Europe. Just in the month of May, European registrations of Tesla dropped by about 30%. You've seen double-digit drops in countries like France, Germany, even here in the UK as well. Let's flip the board and have a look in terms of how the broader picture is shaping up for Tesla, given, of course, the tension with President Trump, who suggested that Doge should even start looking at the business empire of Musk. The credits is important. There's been analysis in terms of the regulatory changes coming through from the Trump administration from JP Morgan suggesting that 40% of Tesla's profits could be wiped out depending on how that regulatory landscape shifts. And squarely in focus are those credits, which make up about 2.8 billion, close to 3 billion in terms of revenue for this business. Now, Bloomberg Terminal users can get these charts, of course, on the terminal. The opening trade is up next, though. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.